All right. Go here. Okay, and I'm going to click the button.
Click the button. Do it. Do it.
Oh, yeah. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Underground QA Podcast, a podcast about quality assurance in the video game industry. My name is Chris, and my pronouns are he, him, and we have two beautiful fellow QA professionals joining us with today's conversation, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi there. My name is Ariel Smith. I am a test discipline manager at Bungie, and my pronouns are she, her.
And my name is Marcin, and my pronouns are he, him.
And I just want to give a quick shout out to Sarah, who's behind the scenes, acting as our producer and managing our social channels. Love you, Sarah. Thank you. And then finally, bit of business, a quick disclaimer. All individuals appearing on the podcast are not doing so as official representatives of their respective companies, and the opinions expressed here are their own. Thank you.
Yeah, flawless.
One day I'll get that Micro Machines guy.
I still think you should just do the entire podcast in that voice, and I will stand by that opinion.
All right. Well, one day maybe when I'm a little less full of sugar and caffeine. Maybe we can do like a side episode where I just kind of do ASMR about QA.
There we go.
Just talk about it. It's like proper bug summaries.
Yeah.
Repro steps.
That can be behind the paywall.
There, yes, we'll put that. We'll do a Patreon. Put that on the paywall. Like and subscribe. All right. Well, friends,
what are we talking about today, Chris?
I don't know. All right. So today, everybody, we're going to talk about test case management tools. We want to look into what you should be thinking about when you're looking into picking up potentially using a test case management tool for your organization, and how you can assess the value of the tool and whether it's worth the trouble of switching to a new one if you currently have one and you're a little less than satisfied with it. A couple things we want to point out, and maybe Ariel might let you take some of this one. But we have touched on this a couple times, but a little bit in our previous episodes regarding test cases. We had a 2-part series on test cases back in season 2. It's episode 4 and episode 5. So episode 4, which is part 1, but why though? We discussed what test cases are and what kind of test cases what kind of test cases we create and why they're important, different anatomies, and some noteworthy kind of bits. In episode 5 of season 2, part 2, but how though, we talk about data gathering and the stuff you can get when using test case management systems and why test case management systems tend to be a little better than using just Sheets or Google, or in some cases a lot better.
According to some people. No, I'm just kidding. To
some people, a few individuals, it's better.
I was heavily in my Google Sheets phase back in those videos, so I regret some of the things that I said positively about Google Sheets. But
I mean, to be honest, if you don't have too much money, Sheets are a good thing. When you want to scale up or you want to be more professional, then it's time to move on.
Exactly.
That's exactly what was happening too. I was on like the a very small team with very few testers, and there wasn't really like a lot of money to throw around at fancy dancy test case management tools. But these days things are different.
Teenage outskirts Ariel with her rebel phase of Google Sheets, and now she moved to big city of Bungie Town.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Big city of Bungie Town. Oh man. All right, so let's kick it off. What exactly is a TCM or test case management system?
What are they?
What is this? Now, I mean, there are a lot of examples. We can look at all the different tools that do exist, and we can start rattling off a bunch of names. Like a big one that I know a lot of people know are TestRail. There's X-Ray, which I've never heard of. TM4J, Zephyr is one that's, I've used before. And of course, you can use your sheets and stuff. But what actually is one of these tools? Can you guys define it for me? Like, what would you say if you were to give it like an elevator pitch?
Well, I mean, they are essentially a way to organize all of your test cases and running of test cases, which hopefully also includes a lot of useful features around collecting relevant data from the test cases that are run, and that help you then report that data to your stakeholders. So there's, a part of it's just being able to kind of like gather your thoughts about how you're going to test things in a sensible, organized way. And then it's also about gathering the information that those tests produce and organizing that in a sensible, useful way. So some test case management tools will do one really well, but others kind of poorly. Like maybe their organization options are amazing, so people who are writing test cases love them, but the reporting is either awful or non-existent, so the stakeholders who are consuming the reports from it don't like it because they're not seeing the information they want to see.
So when you say stakeholders, I want to kind of jump back a little bit. Like, who are the stakeholders for this? Like, is it just QA? Like, because obviously, like QA, we want to know, like the analysts and the leads want to see what's going on in our spaces. But who are you talking about when you say stakeholders?
Yeah. So I think that you can kind of break down who is consuming TCM software into three like broad categories. The first being the people who are writing your test cases and managing them and organizing them. And then you have the people who are running the tests themselves, like running through the test passes, marking things as pass, fail, finding bugs, and then writing those bugs. And then the third group is the people who are consuming the information that is generated here. And so that can be stakeholders in terms of like producers or leads or maybe even like the designers. It kind of depends. One of the things that like good TCM software will do is it will make it like very easy for the broader dev team to be able to access the results of the tests so that they can see the results, see where the failures are coming from, get a sense of like what features in particular are more broken than others through things like heat maps of issues based on component or something like that. And so you have to think about like the usefulness of a TCM software in terms of its usefulness to those three categories of people, because sometimes software is very good for people who are running through it, but other times it's good for the other folks who are involved. So I generally think of like test writers, test runners, and stakeholders. Test runners sounds like a great cyberpunk game, by the way. Or
it's a spin-off
movie or something.
From Shadowrun.
It's you work for one of the corporations and you like test their military gear by being Shadowrunners or something like that.
There is, yep. Marcin, you were about to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that it's really good to have developers look into, and especially product owners, because usually you get the question of, hey QA, have you covered everything? And you can easily invite them and say, why don't you look for it for yourself? Like you can easily, depending on what software you're using, you can make them feel at home, and instead of them outsourcing everything to you, you can invite them to the table and create the test suites or test cases together with them, and they will point out and help you point out the thing that they're interested most, because we do our job to build that confidence in the team that the software or the game that they're building is good quality. So what's the best solution if not invite them to the table and have them look at the golden paths and all the test cases and be like, why don't you test? Why aren't you testing this? Can you test this? Or I'm very happy they're testing this, and you get like instant feedback from the team that the job that they're doing is the good one.
Yeah, getting that input is good. Making everybody feel included, making everybody feel like they're part of quality and understanding quality is important. It can't just be QA championing it. Everybody needs to find that importance and be involved. All right. Thank you for letting me step back a bit. So test case management systems have anatomy. They have bits and pieces of what actually makes them so beneficial. So what are some of those things that make it so good and why they're so much better than sheets? Like this is going to overlap a little bit into what we talked about in episode 5, but it's good to kind of like reestablish these and kind of talk about the different parts.
I mean, out of the gate, the most basic ones are the creation, maintenance, and then organization and storage. Like that's gonna instant upgrade from Sheets. Like you can do wonders in Sheets, like scripts and all that, but a good test software management will make it super easy to create and then maintain those test cases and then organize them however you want, which then make it for a very easy storage later down the line. Especially when you want to sunset them or go through them, it's very important to have those two bits and pieces exist and be nice.
Yeah. And go ahead, Ariel.
So this kind of is getting at the value of a TCM software for the test writers, right? Is helping them organize their thoughts effectively. And this is something where like different kinds of software are actually going to vary in their level of success here. And so you might find that some of your test folks are very passionate about which software they want to use because like it can either make their job very easy or very difficult depending on how much like running around they have to do in order to move test cases around. So like as an example, if I want to reuse a test case in multiple different test passes, some TCM software structures their organization in a way that everything is in trees and cannot be shared across those trees. And so it makes it more difficult to track like all of the instances of that test case being used if you have to like copy it and re-add it to multiple places because your TCM software does not have an idea of like sharing test cases across test passes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that is very painful for like trying to assess the value of that specific test case.
Yeah, and that can get excessive. Like you're just talking about needing to duplicate test cases across different areas of the same software. That can end up bogging it down, especially if it's a cloud-based thing. You end up slowing down everything because you have multiple instances of the same test case all over the place, potentially all being run simultaneously on multiple platforms, and then suddenly you get 504 errors all over the place. It's just a big mess. So that is something to think about, which we'll touch on that kind of little tidbit of it a little bit later.
This is a great example of like, Chris, I feel like a piece of TCM software hurt you at some point, and this is.
Look,
this was a very specific piece of damage that you're calling out.
All right. Maybe I'm showing my hand a little bit, but you know, I'm trying to be professional here and point out that it is a problem. I did get hurt a couple times, so we'll say
that. So definitely like that organization for the people who are creating test cases and the level of depth that goes into that varies wildly across TCM. So, you know, it's good to have an idea, like when you start looking for TCM software, it's good to have an idea of how you want to structure your test cases. Like what is your sort of ideal setup? Because that will help steer you in the right direction. You don't want to like commit to a piece of software and spend a bunch of money on licenses and stuff, and then halfway through setting it up, you're like, oh my god, it doesn't have this very important feature that is now making my life hell. I wish I had thought of it ahead of time. So it's really important to have a plan about how you are going to use your TCM software before you actually like purchase it and start like moving people over to it, essentially.
Yeah, that's a very important point because like every management software has that where the creators have specific methodology in mind or a specific way in order to structure a project. Like in Jira, you know, you always have those blue for not started, yellow work in progress, and then green done.
Yep.
You cannot go over it. Like it's embedded into the code, so you cannot go over it. You cannot just change it randomly.
Yeah.
And the same goes for a lot of TCMs. Like, you have to pay attention to that because otherwise you can screw yourself very, very badly.
Yeah, you mentioning the colors like kind of messed with me. I recently was doing a Jira thing, and it's because I can't change the colors, it ruined an idea I had. I was just like, ugh. But anyways, but that like each like we're kind of like, it's good that we're touching on this, like with all the anatomy and what a TCM can actually bring to you and your organization. There's the concept of going in with a plan, because if not only just like, okay, understanding the methodology of what the designers of this program, the developers of this tool that you're using had in mind, and how to use it, and messaging how to use the tool. But there's also building out, like Ariel was pointing out, like how we as an organization use the tool.
Yeah.
Because if you just kind of ramp everyone up and be like, all right, here's how X cool, awesome tool works, good luck. Everyone's going to have their interpretation of what they think should be done and how it should be done. And then you end up with a mess.
Yeah.
You end up with an absolute mess.
Yeah.
It's not great.
And it's important to remember that you're talking about three different group of people's needs.
Yes,
when you're coming
exactly
to the TCM software. So each of them is going to there's going to need to be some kind of plan about how they're going to be interacting with the tool.
Exactly.
Like when it comes to reporting, for example, does lots of these kinds of software have like licenses that you have to purchase, right? So if you want your dev team to have visibility into your test cases so they can like review them and give feedback or even make alterations, create their own test cases maybe, are you going to purchase licenses for all of them? How many licenses do you need for those folks too so that they can do it? Or is there some way that like the software can send them that information without them having to log in the same way a tester does? Like TestRail, for example, will mail test results to stakeholders like automatically if you want them to do it. But then if those stakeholders don't have TestRail licenses, they can't click on it and go into the software and like actually like take a look at it. So you need to have a plan for not just how are my test writers going to be using the software to write, but also have a plan in terms of how are the stakeholders going to be accessing the information they need from this tool, and how are my test runners going to be running these test cases, and is there any workflow problems that will come up for them? Like if it's a tool that can only be used on site and some of your people are working remotely, well then how are they going to be able to access it? That kind of thing.
Oh man, if in 2022 you can only access a tool on site at this point, man, there's bigger problems than your TCM choices. Oh goodness. But that's a really good point. Like being able to figure out how much visibility into the actual tool do some of these I guess like non-QA stakeholders actually need. Like I think TestRail is a good example. If I were to hand that to, I don't know, someone in production, like they would walk in there and just see this, just be inundated with a ridiculous number of graphs, and they would just be terrible. I mean, if they recently came from QA, they'd probably navigate just fine. But for the most part, it would just be a big, cumbersome tool that they don't understand as well as QA. And they'd just be like, well, I have no use for this. So actually spending the money to make sure that they can get into the tool doesn't make as much sense as being able to kind of just compile like, cool, on a regular basis, we'll send out the results of these tests because they get done maybe like smoke tests that happen every day. Cool, it just sends it out, and then you can get a good idea of like, all right, here's what the graphs say, here's the test that failed, and you can start having those conversations. Like production can start getting people together and be like, hey, this area failed again. Hey, QA lead, I saw that this happened here, let's talk about it, and get those conversations moving without having to spend the resources and the space on a tool to get someone who's not going to use the tool in there.
Yeah. I mean,
it also depends on. Yeah.
That's why I like tools that integrate directly with Jira in like good ways, so that the stakeholders can like see the information they need to see without having to see everything. That's
true. I mean, okay, yeah, I'll give you that. I have opinions, and as do you, and respect opinions. But I'm a little gun shy about things like that. I like to keep them separate, but that's just me, personal preference.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like you can get them lazy. Why should I go into your TCM if I have everything shown in Jira? So they will be hesitant to go even nearer. I mean, like, just present me the data, just throw the reports at me, and I'm not going to look at it, which also poses a risk, right?
As much as I would like love it if I had designers looking at my tests and like giving me feedback on that, I genuinely would really appreciate that, because they will think of things that you like, oh, you definitely need to test this part of it, because like I'm actually super worried that maybe it's a little bit janky or something like that. Like they once they actually see your plan for how you're going to test something, they might like think like, oh, I had assumed you were going to look at some stuff that it looks like you're not going to look at, and I want to now I want to communicate that I'm worried about them and that I think that you should think about them. So I definitely think that there's value to be had in sharing your test cases with like designers so that they can review them.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, at the same time, I also recognize that like they're not always like in most cases, in my experience, they don't unless you explicitly ask them to and hand it to them and say, "Look at it."
So I think like this is a good area where sheets still have their purpose and their place, and especially with a lot of the more modern test case management tools, it has like an import from Excel or like a CSV file, so you can like build your stuff in Sheets or in Excel. And you can say, hey, engineer that I'm working with, because our studio is progressive and shifts left and QA is in there from the beginning, here's the stuff that I have put together, my test case scenarios. I want you to take a look at them and we can start discussing this. And being able to have those on the fly conversations and edits in a spreadsheet is a lot faster than doing it in a lot of the test case management tools. So then you can have that back and forth, show them what they need. Great. They don't need to get into the tool because they're not really going to actively use it. But it's a lot easier for someone to read a clear spreadsheet than it is to try and learn a new tool and how to navigate these new test cases. Then you can take that, import them in, clean them up, and get them ready for the people who actively use the tool, which would be, like you said, the writers and the runners and the leads.
Though I highly recommend.
Oh, go ahead.
I highly recommend inviting devs, because I did like a 3-part coaching series, introduction series to TestRail, because in my organization we use TestRail. And I was basically showing him how to create, execute, and report on test cases, like in 3-part series. Invited all the developers from the project, so nobody had excuses, and basically allowed them to create their own test cases to showcase them that it's not, QA is not magic. It's not black magic. That's basically whatever testers are doing there, creating spells and praying to dark gods or whatever. It's a process of just creations of the steps or the golden path, executing it and reporting on it, and then magically then I have developers asking or product owners asking why my programmer or designer doesn't have access, because I want him to look on the test cases that the team created. Or now it's easier for them to talk with the testers and be like, I want to look at what are you doing there, because the biggest problem that product owners or producers have is, how do I task my QA? Like, I know how to task programmers or art, but there's no difference in QA. So I still think that it's, even though it's not always, super efficient, or as your Ariel pointed out, sometimes they're like, Marcin showed and whatever, like I'm going to just ignore QA. But most of the cases, they will be interested and now being like, wow, that's not too complicated now. Like, I have a software, it costs money, so I should be using it. And now it's not, a totally alien tool. I can integrate into my process. So I still highly recommend it. It's time consuming, but I guarantee it's worth it.
It is absolutely.
I also think that, like, if you're on a small team, you might find that there are times when you want to enlist the help of non-testers to help you with test work. So it is worth like looking into a tool that is like visible and usable by those folks at least. When I was working in like live QA, I would have like release days where we would be running through a smoke test and we like cranked out a build at the last second, and now the producer and the engineer who made a fix are waiting around for me to finish my smoke test and say I've signed off on it. I can say like, well, hang on, the two of you are just standing around doing nothing. Why don't you like jump in and help me run it? You can't do that
Ariel.
if the tool does not have any visibility to them, like if they don't have access to it because they don't have a license. So I think that it is worth getting your developers into your tool if you're able to afford it. I know that like smaller studios are looking at price tags on TCM software as like a per person thing, being like, I don't know if it's worth it, but there's ways you can work with that in terms of like making sure that the most important folks who are most likely to use it have access to it. And I definitely think it's worth giving access to anyone who you're expecting to consume the information being produced by your test cases. Like, because at the end of the day, like, that is what test cases are for, is they produce data about the state of your product, right? Like, so the people who are consuming that data, like, their interaction with this tool matters too.
It also builds interesting ownership for developers. Like I even had a situation when a product owner came to me and be like, I asked about the quality of the release, and he was like, my test suites of my testers guarantee that. I'm like, wait, like, what do you mean your testers? Like, what is discussion here? So it builds a nice ownership. Like, it's no longer like a QA's job or QA test. Those are my tests. Those are my test suites. Those are my testers. So it builds like nice collaboration and breaks those walls between QA and developers.
Yeah, that's cool. It's always nice to hear that kind of like that collaborative spirit actually showing up. And I really love that idea, especially with smaller development teams, to have more people involved and be able to come in and execute. And this goes into another part of like something that test case management systems offers, that more like standardized way of executing and then getting data from those executions. You can just create something and just hand it to somebody who isn't usually in QA. Like, this could be like in your example with like a producer or a lead engineer who's just kind of hanging out waiting for a smoke results to show up, or your entry level QA tester who's walking in bright eyed and bushy tailed, never touched any of these things before. You can be like, all right, here's this. Just go through it, sees where it clicks pass or fail. Just click the button. Just tell me if it worked, and go from there. And that kind of standardized way of doing it, and clarity and ease of use, is something that these test case management tools can offer.
Yeah, and how like teachable and accessible the tool is will definitely inform to what extent you're able to effectively teach new people who are walking through the door with no prior experience, and how effectively you're able to quickly teach a producer how to jump in and use it.
I like that we're just using producers as an example today.
Yeah, well,
how to train your producer. That'll be episode 7.
I have trained producers to help me with QA on many teams. Sorry, producers, but if it's a small enough team, you're going to help me. But so having a tool that is like accessible and like easy to understand, so like that's part of the reason why some of like the more polished, nice looking testing tools can be a little bit better, is they're like more familiar to people who are familiar with tools like Jira. I mean, some of them are even just like literally plugins for Jira. So then you're definitely in a producer's like happy wheelhouse in terms of their experience if you're just adding plugins to Jira. But yeah, I think it's worth it to get those folks involved, because at the end of the day, like QA is not like an entirely separate discipline from the rest of the development team, right? Like, we are working alongside them, embedded with them in those shift left orgs like you're talking about, Chris. So you really want to, if you want like your testers to have a really good understanding of what the work your designers are doing so that they could test more effectively, then wouldn't it make sense to give your designers visibility and insight into how the testers are doing their work?
Yes.
And so that like that, there is an opportunity to make that a two-way street, because then you can get potential benefits of the designers saying like, actually, I don't understand why you're even testing this thing, because I didn't touch anything related to that. So there's no conceivable way I can think of like how it would break. Like, maybe they're wrong, but maybe they're right, and maybe they just saved you like 15 minutes of running a test case you don't need to run anymore. You won't know until you start having those conversations with them, until you put your test in front of them and say like, is there anything here that stands out to you as wrong? Or another way I would put it is, I sometimes would share my test suites with an engineer, and I would ask that engineer, is there any information that you would like that will not be captured by these test cases?
Ooh, yes.
And they'll be like, you know what, I would like to know X and Y and Z. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to go make some test cases to cover those specific things because I know that my test cases don't. So yeah, I just think it's super important to remember that collaboration is a two-way street. As much as you want information from the designers, there's also an opportunity to share information with them because they can help you with your work too.
I'd like to do unless Marcin, you want to jump in with something else. I want to kind of just real quick aside and address a comment that came in on the Twitch chat. This is from let's see, Snella Phoenix. Like, I think a lot of it depends on the quality of writing on the test cases, and this is going back to letting someone just kind of come in and execute stuff. Mm-hmm. We have issues where a lot of acronyms are used and a lot of instances where step-by-steps are not given, and this causes a lot of issues when new people come along and they just cannot jump in. That's true, and that can be really problematic, and that means that there's probably from an organizational standpoint not really like regulated standards or agreed upon standards of how to write test cases. And usually, like, unless you have a very, and correct me if I'm wrong, friends, unless you have a very like technical group of tests, like you're really like getting under the hood and getting into like some white box stuff and code bases, your test cases should be pretty approachable. And say like, hey, if you need, here's a link to your prior knowledge of stuff that should help you, like some companion documentation with some of the words and acronyms. It should have clear steps on what you're supposed to be doing in order to properly test that case, and what the expected results are. So that way you can tell if it's pass or fail. It should be written in a way where anyone should be able to just execute it. And if they don't grasp immediately the technical aspects of it, there should be a link or something in the test case to go to companion documentation to help you understand that part. Say like, all right, when we use this acronym, this is what it means, and this is how we test it. And here's how you set up your machine in order to do that. Here's where you get the build in order to push it to a console and then run it and get to this section of the game. Here are the cheats you can use. All of that you should have access to in order to execute these.
Yeah. We've talked about the cost of like, testers essentially hoarding esoteric knowledge instead of sharing it outward with other folks.
Yeah.
Like, this is something that Chelsea's brought up before about how like I run into this too. Sometimes testers will hoard expertise because they feel like it makes them indispensable, right? Like they have this very high bust factor. You couldn't possibly get rid of me because I'm the only one that understands all the acronyms in our test suite or something like just to piggyback off your example. But that might like increase your bust factor, but it also decreases your value because it is more valuable to have an employee who shares information with all of the people who need to know it, thus lowering the risk of utilizing that employee. It is more valuable to have someone like that than to have someone who keeps it all to themselves and doesn't share anything. Because that introduces a risk in that if that person gets hit by a bus or something bad happens to them, then they're irreplaceable and now no one can run their test cases. If you write your test cases in a way that anyone can run them, anyone can jump in and do them, then it's very easy to like come in and either support someone with additional help, like stealing that producer I love to borrow all the time and making him do some work. Or to bring on a new tester, to hand it off to outsourcing, to help onboard someone because they don't know how these tests should be run. Well, just look at the test case; it will tell you. Like you don't need to have some kind of separate onboarding to explain it to them.
It always boils down to documentation culture of the company, right? Like you will have the same issues with documentation, with Jira, with anything that is knowledge and information. We all happen to be in the situation when somebody is hoarding knowledge and he's the person you go to for that specific feature or whatever, instead of being documented like a proper person, and then he goes on vacation or goes sick or whatever, or leaves the company, which usually happens. We all heard the horror stories of, because in the code you also document, like you should be proper culture should be you comment on everything, so it's not a mystery. And we all saw those comments when don't touch this. Nobody knows how this piece of code works. It's magic. You don't touch it. You have to have. Nobody knows how it works. Don't touch it because you will break it, and it's left there forever. And the same goes, for test cases. In the end, test cases are any kind of documentation. And you have to make sure that, if you're talking about pop-up, everyone knows what is pop-up, because sometimes it's going to be a prompt, a window, error message, like people have different things. You have the same with bug reporting, right? Like the saying goes, somebody is like, I cannot find this bug. And why do you have trouble? Like just message and you type it in, prompt appears, and I'm like, I never used prompt for it, and it's like, now you know. So we've all been in the same place. So just make sure that the documentation culture in your organization is worked out, because otherwise you will end up in those issues, not only for your test cases and test suites, but also for documentation or Jira or project management.
Yeah, I agree.
I do want to also point out one last little bit with this aside, is that Lady Odd Duck, again, adding another side of this, is that this does happen unintentionally too, where
definitely.
you might write a bug that's just kind of like, this happens, there you go. You see that, and also test cases, going back from Phoenix's comment about how some of them aren't that filled out, because we're just so used to it and take for granted, as Sarah put it, all the things that you learn early on. So you end up just starting writing test cases like for yourself, or the people that are really knowledgeable. Just be like, okay, it's this thing. Everybody knows what this is, right? Bam, bam, bam. Just run through it. Tell me if it passes or fails. And again, like, you take for granted all that knowledge that you had to absorb and learn and reference when you first started, that now it's like, oh yeah, it should feel like everybody knows this, but a brand new person, or our favorite producer to borrow and force them to do QA work, it might not actually know.
I think that's one of the things that TCM software gives you, is it gives you a tool by which you can create clear standards for your test cases, right? You can. Some of them will even let you set things like required fields. No, every test case has to have a priority now. That is a thing that we are doing. We want to be able to prioritize our test cases, so that if we decide we only have time to run the high priority ones, we can easily do that, right? So there is an opportunity to create a standardization in terms of, this is how everyone is going to write their test cases. We are also going to help standardize the work that our test runners are doing by writing their test cases in a specific way. Maybe you even use it to standardize the kinds of reports that you are generating and creating for your stakeholders. Like every single, let's say every single like test status report or something like that needs to report their progress. Well, now you have a tool that actually tracks progress, and you can give that kind of feedback. So it is also worth thinking about, like, when you're looking for your software, what kinds of standards do I want to create, set, enforce, support, otherwise make a reality by using this software? Because if you are trying to like start a new process by which people add priority to their test cases, then if you have a TCM software that requires it, that makes it real easy, right?
Exactly.
So,
yes. Oh my goodness. That is a huge point for me. And that goes back into like that comment we made about going in with a plan. Yeah. Like, you need to set those standards in, because like this is where I've been hurt. Because if you walk in, and it can all be with good intentions. It could just be because people are just ultra busy and be like, hey, we trust you all to take care of your teams. Go. Here's a basic idea of what we're thinking. You need to kind of get really granular about it. Like, how are you going to use each field? What are our definitions of each piece of that drop down? Like, even though, like, to use TestRail as an example, they come pre-baked with a lot of things that you really can't change. And there are different things and different drop downs to choose from. Be like, all right, are we going to adopt this vernacular, or are we going to change how we feel it's going to be used? Like, we need to address that as a team, get those standards out, and then start rolling it out slowly, instead of saying, all right, everybody, here's how this tool works. Prop up things for your team. Good luck. Yeah. Because then you end up with a lot of disorganization, a lot of it. This kind of echoes back to the talking about the inconsistent. You end up with inconsistency between test cases. You end up with some test cases that are extremely detailed and have a lot of reference material in there and really just walk you through like, all right, this is how you're going to test this. This is how you're going to get us the proper information that we need in order to know whether or not things passed or failed, or even if this is a valid test case anymore.
Yeah.
And then you get something that's just like, check this thing, make sure it works. Like, what? Like,
yeah.
Come on.
I mean,
so your testers are running these things. They got to think of, I'm sorry, I'm just like,
no,
this is my moment here. So you end up with your test team, which some of them might be devoted to certain areas, but for the most part, they're going to run a group of tests from one potential team, maybe perf, and then the next they're going to run stuff related to gameplay, maybe something on a new weapon, and all of them are written differently, not just because of what they're testing, but just because a standard across the board was not put in place. So it can kind of make their heads spin trying to be like, oh, all right, this person wrote these test cases, so I have to think of it this way. This group wrote these test cases. I'm going to get all the information I need, so this should be fine.
Yeah, like there's a very common thing where like sometimes you will find someone wrote their test such that each test case is a step, right? So like you do one thing and then you check a thing. You do a thing and then check a thing. You do a thing and then check a thing. And then there's other people who will have or other test cases that will have 10, 20 steps, and then you check one thing at the end of that, right? And the way that those two tests will be constructed will look very different, even though their core structure is basically the same. They have steps and expected results and points of failures and stuff. It can still be a little jarring to go from one to the other as a test runner. It might interrupt your flow if a test had a mix of both, for example.
Exactly.
So, or they might look in the wrong place for the steps because they were expecting it to just be in the title like it had been in all of the previous ones, and then they missed that, oh, this one had 10 extra steps that I needed to do in order to complete it correctly. So yeah, I think that's getting back to what we were talking about before with it's important to set a clear standard for how you want your test case tool to be utilized, and having an idea of what that standard is when you go into it, when you start looking for the tool, when you find the tool and start building it, is good, because you will know whether or not the tool is even capable of supporting that standard enforcement that you're looking for.
And you have to consider your position, right? Because maybe you're on a very small indie team that, 10 people, primarily mobile games, so probably a big overbloated TCM is not for you. Maybe on a publishing team and you're working with several or even sometimes dozens of game studios, and you want to standardize tests between those, or maybe you want to invite playtesters that are totally not QA, though just players that don't know what a TCM is, and you have to onboard them to do test cases and then report bugs. And even
I like
in bigger
using the
organizations,
example of production of publishing QA. That's a good point.
Yeah. Because depending on which side QA you are, either you no matter if you're in a small team or bigger organization, even in bigger organizations, you might be, like you mentioned, you might be in an embedded team, and how the team works is completely different from general team. How you validate stuff and how you do general passes. Gameplay will do different tests than audio or art, and then that depends also on the game that you're creating, right? You'll treat differently. I can only imagine on bigger companies when you have, for example, Riot, you have League of Legends, then you have Valorant, and so it's FPS, then you have MOBA, and then probably you have also mobile games, all that stuff. For Epic Games, Fortnite also do an engine. So those are completely different. And do you use just one TCM and try to marry all those concepts together? Or you end up in a situation when maybe you want to use more than one TCM and you just do that TCM for that stuff or the other. So there are a lot of positions you have to consider. So I think we have to hit the home run with go in with the plan and consider your position, what will be most used feature for you. Yeah. Because depending on your position and point in the structure, you might value different features more than the others.
That's a really interesting point about potentially, if your organization is large enough to warrant this, wanting to investigate using a different test case management tool from maybe the game versus the engine. That is fascinating. Like maybe one tool actually can help with game development and games QA a lot better than another one would, but that one would be better with the more software side of things that would come from working on an engine, especially if you have your own proprietary engine. Like, that's a really good point. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, going through our anatomy for the TCM, like some softwares will value making execution very easy, like having guest accounts that anybody can execute, or easy of creation of multiple test suites, and then data gathering and reporting, like depending on if you want to choose go in detail with the data, one TCM will be great at it, and then the other one will be won't be able to show you the data you want. Or example of Tetra, it has a very poor automation API. So maybe if you're going into an engine and having those backend stuff and wanting to have a lot of APIs with automation, maybe Tetra is not a point of choice. Maybe look for something different. So depending on what you value more, like if they create a lot of test cases and then you forsaken them because you're a publisher, then focus on that on that point. If you're a big organization and having organization and storage, then choose the other one. If you're doing a lot of executions because you're a big publisher, then go for that. So again, go through the anatomy, go what will be that feature that is most used for your place or for your position, and then go from there. Because all of us here, I think, can say that there's no perfect TCM. And as we said before,
absolutely not.
The one TCM will just choose one thing over the other, or sets of things over the others, and then you'll have to live with that. So choose wisely, because again, you can screw yourself over down the line. And if you don't research properly, you might be, this trail is very good, and then you want to do automation, and then your automation team will suffer for eternity. So choose wisely.
Yeah, I mean, it's going back to have a plan going
Suffer
into it.
For eternity.
Know what you want to do with it. If part of what you want to do with it is like have a tool that you can utilize with your automation team, then you should probably have an automation engineer in on the discussions about which tool you're going to use and looking at the different ones you're evaluating.
Giving them the opportunity to explore the API that they let you, like, what does the access look like? What kind of tooling can you do? Like, can you make the import functionality a little better and a little more pointed to what your needs are? How easy is it to add a new field or a drop-down functionality that the tool doesn't innately give you?
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Having people in with those conversations when you are planning your approach or not just planning your approach, investigating what tool. That's a good point. I like that a lot.
You have to flip the table and look at, instead of looking at the features, what you want. Maybe there are things that you don't that will be limiting, and you don't want that. So maybe instead of looking for things that you want in that, you want to flip the script and being like, this software doesn't have that, so I want to deal with that. So look at the limitations of TCM.
Some programs also are customizable. Like once you buy the license, if you have your own developers who want to tweak them or adjust them or add features to them or whatever, so that's sometimes possible too. So that's another thing to consider is if you want to make changes to a specific TCM software, how easy is it to do that? Does it give you any tools to make those changes yourself, or does it does it let you change it, or are you essentially hacking it in order to force it to change? Yeah.
Oh man,
there's so much stuff. It's too much stuff.
Yeah.
So many things. All right, so let's do a little bit of a recap here. So we have hit a lot of what the different anatomy is in these weaving conversations. This has been a great conversation too. This has been excellent, and I really appreciate the people having the conversations along us with in Twitch chat. So thank you very much for joining in on that. We've gone over a lot
real quick. If you are watching this on YouTube or listening to it on podcast software, I highly recommend you check it out on Twitch, because that way you can see what people are talking about in the chat. Because there's lots of really smart folks in there who are kind of chatting along with us while we go through this.
And it sometimes confession, I'm not usually great at looking at the chat, but when I do see something that's good, I try to bring it in. So apologies if I missed some comments, but thank you for jumping in there and having the conversation along with us. So looking back, like we've gone over a lot of the anatomy of what a TCM offers and some of the benefits, some of the potential limitations. Like we've definitely talked about like the need to setting up and going in with a plan. Like that's important. There is like a ramp up element too, depending on how complex the tool is. You need to train your people, like not only if you go in with the plan, like how you plan on using it, but how the tool actually works. Like especially if they're going from sheets to using this type of tool for the first time. It's like, all right, we got to walk you through what all of this stuff means. What's the vernacular? So once again, because I'm more familiar with it, like using TestRail versus Zephyr to kind of compare them. Like they have like Zephyr, because it's embedded in Jira. If you're already familiar with Jira, Zephyr's a lot easier to transition over to. Whereas, and also like with any Atlassian things, they use their kind of like rich text format for making things look pretty in comments and in bug descriptions and on wiki pages. But TestRail has their own proprietary syntax for when you want to format how things look within your test descriptions and your steps. So you kind of have to learn another like formatting language in order to get things to look certain ways, like creating headers and bullet points. It's a little irritating.
Yeah. Yeah. This is again going back to what we were talking about with personas, right? Like this is why you want both a test writer and a test runner to evaluate the software, because the test writer is going to have some very specific concerns, and they're going to be like, oh my God, this formatting, it's going to take me twice as long to write every test pass because I have to deal with this formatting, and at least until I learn it, right? That is something you want to consider, but it's not going to affect the test runner at all. Like they're not changing the formatting or writing anything, right? They're just marking pass or fail. So it's actually quite simple and easy for them. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Good opportunity to practice utilizing personas as when you're evaluating software.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. Points, Ariel, for bringing back personas. All right. We also touched a little bit on like licenses. Like sometimes you just get a blanket license and everyone can jump in and have fun all they want. But other times you actually have to pay for seats. And depending on what your organization is giving you for a budget, you might not like some test case management tools. Like you want to say like, all right, can I actually bring production or the engineering team to give them access to take a look at things? Or are they going to have to just be okay with getting an email or looking at our sheets that we're going to import in later?
Yeah.
That's a very important thing in understanding like how much is it going to cost and how much is it going to cost to give everybody access. Because most importantly, you want QA. Everybody in QA needs to be able to get in here. Everyone else, that would be cool. But let's see what the limitations are there.
Yeah, I in particular like to be cognizant of cost with teams that are moving to a test case management tool for the first time. It's easy to compare cost if you already have a tool, because you can say, well, our current tool costs us this, and
yes, exactly.
This one costs us this. What are we getting for that? But sometimes the price tag can look intimidating just because like, oh, well, do you really need this? Like, can we get away with not giving you a test case management tool? If you do experience any kind of resistance when you're trying to get a tool, there's a couple options. One is you could try and bear that in mind and go for a cheaper option. But I think even better might be to just remind whoever's giving you the pushback, whoever stakeholder it is, that you want your QA team to be a professional team. In order to be a professional team, they need professional tools. And just,
mint that one.
Emphasize that you are trying to escalate your team's productivity and quality to a professional level. And like, doesn't that sound good? Don't you want that? Don't you want your professionals to be professionals?
Don't you like professional stuff? Yeah. Do you like nice things?
Do you like testers that are good? Because this will help them do that.
Oh, man.
Ariel, and who likes good testers? They point out all the bugs and problems with your software and games. Like,
yeah, that's true. That's fair.
I don't want to be reminded of my failure. Thank you. And then one last bit that's good to, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, like skirted around, but there is the concept of you mentioned, Ariel, just now, with if you're using already one test case management tool, like being able to look around at others and compare the budgets, benefits, or do like that cost analysis is good. but it's also very difficult to change someone's mindset from a team's mindset from one test case management to another when you're changing over to understand that new tool's design philosophy and what kind of structure you need to do in order to properly use the tool and get the data you need out of it.
Yeah.
Like that's a hurdle.
Well, anytime you move to a new tool, there's going to be pain points, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's going to cost you a bunch of time up front to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully the tool makes it easy for you. Most test case management tools have some kind of like import function, so you can export your test cases to a spreadsheet and then import them directly. And, you know, most of the time that will go relatively swimmingly, but there will be a period of adjustment. People will be like, well, this tool does this thing that I don't like, or it doesn't do this other thing that our previous tool did that I really liked. And it sucks. Some features you're going to have to like miss out on, and other features are just not going to be as good as the one that you were previously using. That's just a part of making that like analysis when you're switching between tools. Is it going to be worth it? Sometimes the answer might be no, but you won't know until you're actually like diving in and testing it. And I would say, like, if you find that you start using a tool and it's actually worse than whatever you were using before, don't be afraid to pull up and go back if you like are confident that you were better off. But I also think that you are very likely to run into a lot of resistance early on, even if the new version is actually better. So
that's true.
Sometimes you need to kind of like stick to your guns and be like, nope, I am confident this tool is better because of X, Y, and Z. We aligned on what our values were as far as what we wanted to get out of a tool, and this just objectively does that better. So yes, it sucks. You lost the cool thing you liked, but we are pressing forward.
We're hopefully going to give you more cool things that you will like later than the cool thing that you liked over here.
Any tools, there's trade-offs, right?
Exactly. And it's you're going to see the same kind of like resistance to change when you're setting up the standards for that. Like if you need to like go in and look at your tool, like, oh shoot, we've been using this tool for X amount of time. We need to revamp how we're looking at it because we're not getting what we need out of it. People get comfy. I mean, like, well, I've been using it like this and getting what I need, so why should I change? And regardless if it's a new tool or you're revamping the same one, people are going to get a little upset if you're going to rattle their process.
Humans are creatures of habit. They don't like change. Why do you want to change my cozy? Maybe I suffer. Maybe I bitch about the software, but I goddamn like it and I don't want to change. So sometimes you have to fight with that. But
Marcin coming down with the hammer here.
I mean, for example, I really love that. I'm using TestShare for I think 7 years now. I really love that tool. So I wouldn't, even though probably it's a lot of habits that I really, learned to love that software. So probably I don't want to change it just because it's so natural to me. So also have that in mind that sometimes the cost of change is sometimes too much. Like don't only think about the cost in terms of licenses of ramping up. Sometimes maybe it just works for your team and for the culture of your company. So forcing people just because that new thing, the new TCM is more shiny or even better, you might end up worse, even though it's better in feature set and everything, just because it was so engraved in your processes and worked really well with your processes. The cost of change was just too much.
I want to force 100 people to use a new tool because it has this one field that I like, right? Like that's a terrible way to make that decision.
Exactly. All right.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an excellent conversation. And thank you both for being part of this. Now, Ariel, I'm going to put the spotlight on you for a little bit with this one because we don't have a bug of the day for today's cast, but Ariel, you had an interesting experience regarding a test case management tool.
I sure did. So I was testing out some different test case management tools and looking to switch from Sheets on my team to something else. We tried a couple, landed on one in part because it was very well integrated with Jira. And so we were using it for a few months and it was mostly going well. And then we discovered that something horrible had gone wrong. This tool had an option to fail a test case, and it had a second option right next to it called fail and fail all subsequent test cases. So there was a very small but subtle difference between marking a single test case as fail and marking 100 test cases as fail. And this button did not care whether or not someone had already run those test cases and say marked them pass, and would just override it and mark them as fail anyway. So we had this experience where I had like a couple of testers accidentally hit the fail all subsequent test cases button and override hours of work in an instant. And I was so flabbergasted that the button was like so close to the other one, given how easy it was to just like override all of this work. But like it was assuming that one person is running through all of these test cases in a linear order, and that if one test case failed, you would not be able to run any of the other ones because you would be hard blocked, which is a mind-blowing assumption to make.
That is a choice to make from a UX UI standpoint of that development team. Just be like, you know what? Let's do the one that just destroys everything else and put it right next to the button that just takes care of one piece.
Yeah, let's
just do that.
The self-destruct next to the ignition. I'm sure no one will ever mix these two up.
It's the equivalent of check out all in a Perforce.
Yeah, exactly. The
Fail everything and go for the weekend. Good.
Delete workspace or delete depot. I can't tell the difference between these two.
Friday 5 o'clock log out.
Anyway, so
gross.
That was one of the most painful experiences, and it wasn't a bug. It was just a bizarre feature. Like that. If I could have, I would have just removed it and then continued to use that software. But I didn't have the customization option to remove this freaking self-destruct button from all of my test suites. So we stopped using that tool and wound up using something different. I was shocked.
Imagine that it landed as a bug and developers were like, nobody will use it like that.
No, yeah. People are gonna know. It's fine.
People will know. Yeah,
people will know.
Who's gonna press that button on accident? Come on.
Yeah.
Oh man,
our users are responsible, smart people.
And yeah, Sarah, I agree. I hope there are therapists that specialize in TCM trauma, because like there are definitely some QA specialists that have been hurt out there.
Yes.
Us included.
My therapist has heard enough.
Anyway.
All right, friends. Well, thank you, Ariel, for sharing that misadventure. That's a beautiful one. I love it. All right, friends. I think that wraps it up for today's episode. I want to thank Marcin and Ariel for joining on the podcast. And Sarah, thank you for being our support in Twitch chat and on the social channels. We'd also like to thank all of our audience for listening and for joining us in the Twitch chat. We wouldn't be doing this podcast without you. So if you have any suggestions for future topics or bugs of the day, we'd love to hear from you about them. If you're a QA professional and would like to be on the podcast, we would love to have you. In either case, please contact us at undergroundqaconf@gmail.com. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter at undergroundqa, because we'd love to hear from you and collaborate. Additionally, you can check us out on our Discord. We have a fantastic community of QA professionals who are just the most lovely humans that have been able to read threads, chatting back and forth regarding like resumes and spicy QA content, some more professional conversations, sending out hiring notes and opportunities around the industry. Please jump in on our Twitter bio. It should have a link to our Discord. So jump in and join the conversation. We'd love to have you. Before we go, is anybody have anything they would like to plug for this episode? It's okay if you don't.
Main thing I want to plug is season 2, episode 4, and season 2, episode 5. If you found this conversation interesting, you'll probably be interested in those two, because they also talk about test cases and TCM software. Just take a different look at it. So I recommend those.
Cool. Martin, anything?
I don't want to end on a sour note, but I think I have to kinda. So
do it.
I want to ask people to I wanna. Yeah, we are too happy here. I have to channel my Polishness here. I have to bring back the gray. It can't be too white. So I want to plug to support Ukraine. The war is still ongoing, and I'm mentioning specifically because on Monday, in retaliation to the damaging the Crimea bridge, is important to support the Russian troops. Russia shot a lot of rockets into different cities of Ukraine, and I specifically mentioned it because we wanted to go back to the office this week, and we couldn't because on the day, basically rockets flew out the cities and destroyed a lot of things, and there were a lot of casualties. So please support Ukraine. The war is still ongoing. Please remember that, and however you want, activism, money, or just share the news.
Is there a particular charity you would recommend?
Oh, there's a lot of them. So I think depends on your allegiance of how you want to support, because there's, for equipment, for just humanitarian aid. So depending on how you want to support, there are different. So I cannot recommend any single one, but however you want, just please support Ukraine.
Thank you for that dose of reality, Marcin. Appreciate it. It's important to know, and we're all thinking of you all out there in Eastern Europe, because this has been a terrible time for the last 8 months.
Yeah, on the game industry conference, there were a lot of developers from Ukraine, and we were sharing our stories of how game development still happens in Ukraine. A lot of people that moved to Poland or other countries and are still developing games in those conditions. So
yeah,
man, Ukrainians are tough people, so they still make games, and it's really awesome to have such awesome, and to be working with such awesome people.
Yeah, and there are a lot of external QA houses out there too, that are full of just excellent people and excellent QA brains that are doing their job all across like software and games.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Marcin. All right. Well, everyone, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all for listening. Once again, keep playing, keep testing, and please keep washing your hands. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Hopefully you all can hear this. We can fix it in post. Bye, friends.